Greetings, Fantasticos. In this writing lesson, we're going to talk about organization of a personal narrative. I'm going to use the example of my personal narrative that I read to you a couple of weeks ago. But if you weren't there or have forgotten it, I will post it to Google Classroom so you can read the whole story. As you recall, this is the story of when I went up to St. Mary's, Alaska, when I was 14 years old to start my high school there. And we're going to first go through and take a look at the parts of a story. So, we talked about the exposition as the beginning of the story, where we introduce the characters and the setting. So here I've started with a bit of dialogue. You can see that I'm the main character and I'm also the narrator. I'm telling the story. That means it's told from a first person perspective. You get my thoughts and feelings. You're not going to get Sister Angie's thoughts and feelings. She's a character outside of my own head. Then I introduce my stepfather. I talk about some of the issues I'm having. I introduce the town of St. Mary's. All of this kind of takes place in my head. We're flashing back to what's happened before. Here, something new happens. It's not a very big event. Sometimes in personal narratives, they aren't. But Sister Angie has started to explain something, and I've firmly established the problem by now that I'm scared, that I'm worried, that I don't want to be moving away from all of my friends and all of the things that I knew. As we go into the next part of the story, there's going to be rising action. That's the portion of the story that explains how you solve the problem. So as I'm going through and writing about this, I'm interspersing a description and explanation of the setting with also ways that I solved my problem. So I notice here some of the tightness eased out of my chest. That's giving you a clue that I'm starting to solve my issues. The pictures are just to help you understand things. So then I've remember we talked about how the rising action can be really bumpy. This key, my shoulders stiffened again, is giving you a hint that once again I'm having a problem. I'm explaining how the problem is. I feel alone. And I'm reinforcing the way I feel. This is all rising action. I'm explaining steps I took to solve the problem. So I'm still in the process of solving the problem in this portion. I have some internal dialogue. We'll talk more about that later, explaining what I'm thinking and feeling. And right here, we start to have a change. So the rising action is steps I took to solve the problem. And in this case, I didn't really take that many steps. They kind of happened to me, and that's okay too. Um, at this paragraph here, there's a change. You can actually see it kind of being foreshadows here. That there was a window bright with the end of summer sun. Pictures beautified it. The tone has shifted. That's a hint that something's going to happen. And now, with this, that was one of my favorite books, that tells you that my problem is starting to be solved. Now, here, I knew it was going to be all right. So at this point, my problem has been solved. And in my story, there's not very much resolution, but there is still character change. At the beginning of the story, I was afraid, trying to convince myself that I wasn't. By the end of the story, I'm feeling better. Having a problem that you solve and having character change are two things that can really help your personal narrative stand out. But as we talked about throughout this video, sometimes it's not really obvious what steps you took to solve the problem. And sometimes the character change is pretty subtle. It's just in your own head. It's not a big, gigantic deal. Another important thing to remember about personal narratives is that usually they're about a very small section of time. In this case, this is probably less than a half an hour out of my life. Even if you're thinking, hey, this is just about an argument I had with my little brother, it's not long enough to make a story. Stick with it and see if you can find evidence of a problem you solved and some character change. And the character change and the problem don't have to be huge. Now look back at your story mountain that you wrote and see if you can make sure you have a clear problem and you have some possible character change in your story. Then you may go ahead and open up Google Classroom and you'll find an assignment under Writing Quests that will allow you to start drafting your story. You can also access that through Classcraft.